rise of Armenian literary life, the translation literature tradition started its long and creative journey. The importance of translation movement led to establishing a national and religious holiday called Holy Translators' Day, symbolizing the creation of the Armenian alphabet, translation movement and schooling, and celebrated annually in the month of October. The translation movement gave birth to and nurtured international literary liaisons, which also have centuries-old history. In the world literature, one of the most translated authors into the Armenian language is the greatest English playwright, William Shakespeare, whose 40th anniversary of death was celebrated in April this year. Shakespeare's name was known to Armenians as early as the 17th century. Next slide, please. Armenian national and political figure Joseph Emin, who lived long years in London, in his book My Life and Adventures, published in London in 1792, referred to the plays Othello and The Merchant of Venice. He was also personally familiar with the great Shakespearean actor Garrick. A pivotal role in spreading Shakespeare's works belongs to Shtemaran Journal, published in Kolkata. The first translated citations from the plays Two Gentlemen of Verona, Much Ado About Nothing, Midsummer's Night Dream, The Twelfth Night, Hamlet, Othello appeared in the articles published between 1822 and 1823. These were the first samples of translations from immortal Shakespeare. At the beginning of 1830s, in literary studies and in press, estimations of Shakespeare and his works were done by Armenians. The first to express an opinion was the alumnus of Moscow Lazarian Seminary, a 20-year-old philology student Sarkis Tigranyan. In the introduction to his translation of French dramatist Racine's plays Gotholia, published in 1834, he called Shakespeare gloriously talented, mentioning his tragedies Hamlet, Julius Caesar, Antony and Cleopatra, Othello, Richard III as profound poetic plays. In the history of Western Armenian literary mind, the first to express an opinion about Shakespeare was the representative of Mkhitaryan convent in Venice, archive mandrite Matevos Mahak Theopilians. In the book Biographies of Outstanding People, published in Venice in 1839, he referred to Shakespeare as the prominent English writer. Following the publishing of both independent and translated theoretical articles on Shakespeare, attempts were made to translate his works. The translator and theatre figure Aram Teteyan from Smyrna, while in London in 1851, saw several of Shakespeare's plays and was fascinated by them. In the press and in separate volumes, the following plays were fully or partially published in Smyrna: The Comedy of Errors, The Merchant of Venice, Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet. His love towards Shakespeare, Teteyan expressed in the following words: "When I read Shakespeare for the first time, I was charmed with fascination." Many dramatists of the time bore the influence of Shakespeare. One of them was the young playwright Petros Durian, who was hardly 20 years old. In his play Theatre or The Miserables, during the intermission between the acts, two people in the audience exchange ideas about the importance and meaning of theatre. One of them tells the other, "It's impossible not to have the feeling of admiration while reading Shakespeare, Schiller, Hugo, and Dumas. I adore those geniuses." As we can see, Durian expressed his own ideas through the words of one of his characters. Another dramatist, Abgar Gulamirian from Yerevan, included several scenes from Shakespeare's Richard III in his play King Senekerim of Armenian Vaspurakan, about which he wrote in the preface to the play. The ideological influence of Shakespeare's works is also obvious in the renowned dramatist Gabriel Sundukyan's plays Beppo and Ruined Family. In 1898, in response to Russian literary man Yuri Veselovsky, as to which authors have influenced him, Sundukyan, along with Russian and European authors, mentioned Shakespeare, whose works he had read in French translation. The influence can be seen when comparing the psychology and actions of characters. Hamlet and Beppo, Timon and Osip, namely complained against injustice and the pain of being abandoned by close people after going bankrupt. The next step following writing about Shakespeare and translating his works was to realize the production of his plays. The first person to stage Shakespeare was Tiflis-born actor, playwright translator, director, theater historian Hovakimyan. He translated Timon of Athens, The Merchant of Venice, and Othello into Armenian from French translations. He was the first performer of Shylock and Othello in the Armenian theatre. Thus, the first appearance of Shakespeare in the Armenian took place on April 17, 1866 in Tiflis. 2 acts from The Merchant of Venice were performed, translated and staged by Hovakimyan. Yet the most prominent rise occurred between 1880 and 1886. On November 20, 1880, for the first time in the history of Eastern people, the first production of Hamlet appeared on Tiflis stage. The first performer of Hamlet was Constantinople-born actor Petros Adamian, whose fame reached England the same year. He played the part of Hamlet also in French in a number of Russian cities with Russian troops and gained a wide recognition. According to Russian critics, his interpretation of Hamlet surpassed that of world-famous European actors. In 1886, Adamian portrayed also Othello and King Lear. A year later, he published a work entitled Shakespeare and the Sources and Criticism of His Tragedy Hamlet in Tiflis, which is the first research on Shakespeare and the Armenian reality. The newspaper Mashab wrote on this occasion, "This study by Petrosyan is a new word in the Armenian literature." In the 1980s, the Armenian translation literature was enriched thanks to the efforts of diplomat and translator Hovakimyan, who translated a number of Shakespeare plays into Armenian. And on the stage, it was Hovakimyan, who was noted by his portrayal of Shakespearean characters. Throughout his artistic career, Abelian appeared in 10 Shakespearean roles, of which he played Othello's part for 40 years and King Lear's part for 25 years. His attempts to play Hamlet failed 2 times because of the censorship at the time. Abelian was also the first Armenian actor to visit Shakespeare's grave in Stratford-on-Avon to pay tribute to the brilliant dramatist. 1980s were marked by the appearance of another actor and director, Georg Petrosyan, in the Armenian Shakespearean theatre, who had previously played Lear's part with Adamian in 1884. In 1896, he acted as King Lear in Astrakhan with a Russian troupe, and later in 1900 he played this role in the Armenian theatre in Baku. He also appeared as Othello, Claudius, as well as in other roles. The year of 1901 heralded an important stage in the Armenian Shakespearean theatre. New performers of Hamlet emerged, among them Karapet Galfayan, Nikolayos Hovhannisyan, and the eminent Armenian actress Siranish. On November 19, the former 2 actors acted also as Othello in various places. What concerns Siranish, she is also credited with being the first actress in the theatrical history of Eastern people to portray the role of Prince of Denmark in the Armenian theatre. She played the role in space of 20 years, 40 times, and even with the Russian company in Baku in the Armenian language. Subsequently, she published an article about her 1.5 year of preparations to play the role of Hamlet. It's interesting to state that in her article, A Manual on One Work of Shakespeare, published in 1907, Hamlet's name is not mentioned because in 1880s, in Turkey, except for the name Sultan, the use of the word king was forbidden even on the stage. This was the reason why Petros Adamian couldn't act as Hamlet and King Lear in those years. The next important stage was related to reforms following the proclamation of the Ottoman constitution, by which several concessions were granted to ethnic minorities. This opportune time was seized to restore the Armenian theatre in Constantinople. Hence, in 1908 August, 20-year-old Bahram Papazian acted as Othello in Odeon Theatre in Constantinople for the first time, a role which later became the axis of his artistic career. Papazian is the only actor in the world who played Shakespeare in 5 languages, in Armenian, Turkish, Italian, Russian, and French. His masterpiece role was that of Othello, He appeared in this role for 56 years, more than 3,000 times, in Turkey, Italy, and Egypt, Iran, Transcaucasus, Russia, as well as a number of countries in Europe. Papazian also authored several books analyzing and interpreting the roles he played, namely My Othello, Hamlet as I Saw It, King Lear, all of which are valuable studies. Shakespeare is the most widespread dramatist in the Armenian theatre. Thanks to the portrayal of his characters, many Armenian actors and actresses earned fame. Among them Armen Armenian, Yekaterina Duryan Armenian, Amo Kharazian, Mikhail Manvelyan, Hovannes Zarifyan, Tırdat Nashanyan, Manvel Mavutyan, Olga Maysuryan, Jasmin, Arus Voskanyan, Satanik Adamyan, Hasmik, and a myriad theatrical figures almost in all the parts of the world, including non-Armenian theatres. In the middle of the 20th century, new names added, among them Mokırtik Canan, Hraçan Ersisyan, Vavash Vavashyan, Yurgen Canibekyan, Khoren Abrahamyan, Levon Tukikyan, Metaxa Simonian, Vartuy Varteresyan, to mention just some of them. Armenians living in the diaspora are also known for portraying characters created by Shakespeare, among them Onik Voltaire, Garnik Baliusyan, Gevorg Gasparyan, Ferch Fazilyan, Varujan Khatsisyan, Grigor Satamyan. Many events organized around Shakespeare's anniversary, theater festivals, festivals of Shakespearean performances, later bearing the name of Bahram Papazian, in Armenia and in the theaters of diaspora, served as a huge motive for ongoing estimation of Shakespeare and his works. Besides giving accounts of artistic unions and companies' creative work, they witnessed and emphasized the idea of Shakespeare's contemporaneousness in the Armenian reality. A major proof of this is also the creation of subsequent activities of Shakespearean Studies Center with a massive library at the Institute of Arts of the National Academy of Sciences. The efforts of the center were crowned by publishing 7 volumes, yearbooks on Shakespearean studies. The center also took the initiative to film the play Coriolanus. It organized a number of scientific conferences and sessions. This brief presentation of Shakespeare in the Armenian theater can be summarized as follows. In the past 150 years, more than 85 translators have partially or fully translated 36 plays, of which the most classical ones are 16 translations by Hovhannes Maslikyan and 19 translations by Hachik Dashbens. Out of these 36 plays, 25 plays have been performed around the world, as well as with participation of Armenians in 27 non-Armenian theatres. It's worthwhile to mention that Armenians have translated Shakespeare into Turkish, Persian, Romanian, Russian, and French languages. 10 collections of Shakespeare's works have been published in the Armenian language, and additionally 53 volumes featuring various plays. Among them, Othello and Romeo and Juliet have been published 6 times, King Lear 7 times, and Hamlet 10 times. Research volumes on Shakespeare amount to 70. Armenians have given to the Shakespearean theatre 94 Othellos, 79 Hamlets. With the participation of Armenians, Shakespeare's heroes have talked to audiences in more than 240 locations. Such is the approach and contribution of Armenians in the history of Shakespearean theatrical studies.